Hello, and welcome to another edition of Ask the Professor, a crowd-powered feature where we respond to your questions on everything from history to economics to political philosophy, current events, all those things that matter to us in our common life. And I'm going to take this opportunity to remind you it is also crowd-powered in that we depend upon your contributions to keep these videos in production. So please do visit the website, that's www.johnrobson.ca, and make a monthly pledge in support of our work.
All right. Here's one that we've paraphrased a little bit. It was an excellent question, but a touch long. It came from Doug, and it has to do with money. And he says, that's our paraphrase of his question. Does the fact that banks create money when they make loans cause the money supply to expand or contract? And does it cause public and private debt to expand inexorably? Please answer that.
That is an important question because the way that banks create money gives a lot of people the willies, and it always has. There have been people from the invention of banking who said there's some kind of fraud going on here. It shouldn't be possible. A bank should only be able to lend out money that it actually has in its coffers. And then a lot of people feel the same way about government printing money. They say money should have to be backed by gold, partly because gold is inherently valuable. It once was because it's beautifully decorative, easy to work, and doesn't tarnish, but also just so that they will not be able to just make dollars out of nothing, because there's something inappropriate about that. And when governments do it, there is a cheat going on, because if the government increases the money supply by, say, 10%, it normally does it in such a way that it has the extra 10% of the money. So in a sense, it's just taken 10% of the economy, which given itself claims to an extra 10% without mentioning it to anybody, without raising taxes. So that really is taxation without representation, without popular consent. And I'm very hostile to it. The government really does have the job of seeing to it essentially that the money supply expands at the same rate that the economy does, which is a delicate task because they don't really know how fast the economy is expanding. GDP is a very poor proxy for total wealth creation, and they also don't really understand what money is. I mean, maybe when it was all gold and silver, it was fairly straightforward, but then you get into, M1, M2, M7, M16, and people have learned debates in economic conferences of a sort that make you wonder exactly how many M's could dance on the head of a spindle.
Or why would anybody care?
Because they have to know if the money supply is expanding.
Really?
But
Okay.
the best way to tell if it is whether prices are rising. That's really the measurement. So how does this all connect to this weird thing that banks do when they create money? Because banks will do this. They will actually lend money in greater quantities than they actually have on hand, on the theory that everybody isn't going to come in at once and try and cash the checks. And odd as this may seem, it has worked for hundreds of years. For a bank to remain solvent, they simply need to have enough money to satisfy all the demands likely to be made on them in that given day. And what governments used to do is say, well, you have to have a certain proportion of your outstanding loans actually sitting in the vault in the form of money or government treasuries. And then more recently, what they did is they took it upon themselves. I'm sorry, this is a little bit arcane, and I'm not making it sound more complicated than it is. If anything, the reverse.
Is that quantitative easing or whatever?
Well, they set the overnight bank lending rate so that if one bank has people coming to it to take money and put it in another bank, and it's all just these conceptual dollars, they have to pay a certain interest rate on the money they haven't actually handed over that's due. And this restrains the ability of banks to create money, because if they create money and then somebody takes it to another bank, they're meant to somehow either come up with it or pay the interest. And so if the government thinks the money supply is expanding too fast, then they will increase the overnight lending rate. And if they think the economy is expanding too slowly, which is where quantitative easing comes in, they'll push it down. Now, let me not make it sound here as though the people in charge know what they're doing just because they're pompous and solemn and sound like they know what they're doing. Because ever since 2008, governments have essentially been pushing interest rates down as low as they can in the belief that this will somehow create real wealth. It will cause banks to lend more money, and this extra money will cause people to engage in more economic activity. What it's really doing is making it cheaper for governments to borrow, which means they can afford to run bigger deficits than they otherwise could, which is bad. And it is encouraging people to borrow and discouraging them from saving. But since we all know that in the end, what is borrowed in terms of real resources must equal what is saved in terms of real resources, the result is to put the economy out of whack, punish prudence, reward extravagance, and somehow think that we can be reckless to such a degree that we'll end up rich. And this is just as bad an idea as it sounds. But it doesn't mean that the banks are somehow cheating, or that they're going to create money in loans, collect interest on the money, and then annihilate the principal, but have the interest remain as money that somehow came out of nowhere. All of it ultimately is tied to real wealth. The price of something is more or less what it's worth divided by the amount of money that's out there. And so if too much money is out there, what happens is prices rise because suddenly there are $1,000 trying to buy what used to be $900 worth of stuff.
Is that what inflation, that's where it
That's
comes from?
basically how inflation...
I get it.
Yeah.
I get it. Yay.
Too much money chasing too few goods. And in the end, we don't get rich. It just starts... It tries to deceive people and fails. Everybody starts to expect inflation and, bad things happen. But and then you get hyperinflation because governments panic, and then...
That's hyper bad.
It destroys saving and wipes out the middle class, which you're always babbling about wanting to protect. And in fact, the savings rate is very low in Canada and the United States right now. In this sense, government policy worked, but it was a bad idea, so we're getting a bad result. But don't worry about banks somehow engaging in jiggery pokery. As more people come to them with reasonably sensible projects, they lend out more money, and as one loan terminates, people have borrowed the money, they've finished their project, they paid back the loan, another one is created. This whole float of loans more or less contracts and expands in keeping with the size of the economy, especially if governments do not bail out reckless banks. That's another thing governments are doing wrong. But understand why bank creation of money makes people squirrely. It looks like something weird is going on, but it really isn't. It's just banks assessing how creditworthy people are and saying if you seem to have either a lot of assets or else you're about to create a lot of assets, we are willing to advance you some of other people's money in order that you can carry out your affairs, because other people are happy to lend you the money because they don't at the moment have a great use for it. And of course, all kinds of little things can go wrong. People's plans do not always work out. Banks don't always get the math right. But essentially, banks are just a conduit of money from savers to borrowers and back again. And that is true even in this odd-sounding business about them creating money when they make loans. Because who won't take John D. Rockefeller's IOU, fundamentally? And the answer is anybody would take it, including a bank.
All right. Now, I have one more question. The tree where the money grows, where is it?
It's in Ottawa. You can tell. People are always saying the government should give this away free, give that away free. The money tree is in Ottawa. Oh. And it is, in fact, the government that actually creates money, that will sometimes just print money or try to. And again, there's been this illusion that if only the government printed more money, we'd all be rich because we'd have more money. It goes back to William Jennings Bryan and free silver. And it's amazing to me that economic policy today, by all these sophisticated central bankers with wah, wah, wah attitudes, goes straight back to the cry of free silver. Mm-hmm. Or which like was idiotic then and is idiotic now.
The guaranteed minimum income. If everybody gets $20,000 before they even start working, we'll all be the same except $20,000 richer, everybody. But yeah, it doesn't make relatively speaking, we're all the same anyway.
The question is, do you do that by printing money, in which case there's just more money chasing fewer goods, or do you do it by coming right out and saying, I'm going to give everybody $20,000, which I'm going to take from somebody else?
Right.
At least that has the virtue of honesty. That rather exhausts its merits, but at least it has the virtue of honesty. So governments creating money, other than by trying to see to it that the money supply grows at the same rate as the economy by regulating bank interactions, is essentially fraud. But banks lending people money is not fraud.
Okay. So if, like me, you feel like you need to rewind this video and watch it again to make sure you get everything, don't feel alone, because I'm right here, not entirely sure I understood and certainly remember everything, but that's okay. Next time, maybe somebody will ask what kinds of puppy videos you like. That would be easier, right?
I do not believe that central bankers understand this. I will level with you. I think that these monetary wizards are in over their heads. And one sheer proof of that is that they told us quantitative easing would revive the economy, and it hasn't. It's been a decade now. Mm-hmm. It hasn't worked. Maybe they don't know what they're doing. It's a frightening thought that the people in charge might be lost in a mathematical thicket, but that doesn't mean it's not true. Frightening things can happen in the world, including in economics.
I was doing almost fine until you said that.
Puppies. We'll do puppies.
Yes, puppies are great.
Adorable.
Adorable, especially with babies. Oh, together? Perfect. The world needs more of that right now. All right, folks, if you would like to play along and ask your question of the professor about puppies and babies or anything else, the URL on your screen will take you to a page where everything is explained. Thanks, and see you next time.